There's no denying it. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has been quite a mess recently. Once a cinematic powerhouse that couldn't be touched, and now it feels like it's barely holding on. Just look at the numbers. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania barely scraped by at the box office, earning $476 million worldwide against a reported budget of $200 million. That's a sharp decline compared to past Marvel hits. And what about The Marvels, which was the worst performing MCU film with dismal opening weekend numbers and lukewarm reviews? Even massive names like Thor can't seem to pull the same weight they used to, and if we're being honest, Secret Invasion might have been the tipping point, bombing with fans and critics alike. So what went wrong? When we talk about the MCU, we're not just discussing a film series, we're talking about a cultural phenomenon. From the first Iron Man in 2008 to the climactic Avengers Endgame in 2019, these films didn't just dominate the box office, they became a part of the collective cultural fabric. People planned their weekends around premieres. Midnight showings were packed. It felt like every new release was an event. But something has changed recently. Let's take Eternals for instance. Directed by Chloe Zhao, an Oscar-winning filmmaker, it had the potential to be something groundbreaking. Instead, it ended up being one of the lowest-rated MCU films on Rotten Tomatoes, sitting at an abysmal 47%. Critics panned it as an overly ambitious and disconnected from the franchise's core strengths. While audiences seem to be indifferent, it's a stark contrast to films like The Avengers or Black Panther, which were universally celebrated for blending spectacle with strong characters and storytelling. It's not just the movies though, the problem has spilled over to Disney Plus with shows like She-Hulk, Ms. Marvel, and Moon Knight. While some of these projects brought fresh ideas to the table, the sheer volume of content has left many viewers overwhelmed and frankly exhausted. The once carefully constructed phases of the MCU has given way to a content factory model. Remember when there were 2 or 3 Marvel films a year, each one feeling like a major event? Now we're getting multiple films and series annually, and instead of excitement, there's nothing. The result? It's a sense that Marvel has lost its way. Think back to the early MCU days. Films like Iron Man, Captain America, The Winter Soldier, and Guardians of the Galaxy told stories that mattered. They weren't just about saving the world, they were about people. Tony Stark's redemption, Steve Rogers grappling with modernity, Peter Quill finding his family. But the new releases? Too often they feel like they're checking boxes. Thor: Love and Thunder is a prime example, a film so obsessed with cramming jokes into every scene that it forgets to let its characters breathe. What should have been an emotional exploration of Thor's grief and loss turned into a tonal mess. And of course the numbers are gonna reflect this decline. Let's look at audience reception. On IMDb, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania sits at a mediocre 6.0 out of 10, far below the 8.4 of Avengers Endgame. And critically, the franchise is losing favor. Rotten Tomatoes scores are trending downward, and audience scores tell a similar story. It's clear that Marvel isn't delivering what fans fell in love with, a cohesive, compelling universe driven by memorable characters. First of all, let me be clear, this isn't just a hit piece on Marvel. The MCU has accomplished something extraordinary, and there's still potential for greatness. If anything, this video is about asking the right questions. What went wrong? How did a studio that once seemed untouchable, where even lesser-known heroes like Guardians of the Galaxy became household names, find itself struggling to hold audience attention? And more importantly, can it bounce back? Because honestly, we can't forget, Marvel has stumbled before. Thor: The Dark World, remember that one? No, well, you're not alone. Honestly, half of us probably couldn't describe the plot if our lives depended on it. It's the movie equivalent of a meh emoji, forgettable at best. And that proves the point. Marvel has survived mediocrity before. Even after The Dark World fumbled, Thor: Ragnarok came along and smashed expectations, redefining the character and reminding us why we love the franchise in the first place. And who could forget Iron Man 2, a film that felt less like a sequel and more like a 2-hour ad for the Avengers. Yet Marvel learned from those mistakes. They didn't just bounce back, they soared. Captain America: The Winter Soldier was a masterclass in blending superhero action with political intrigue. Guardians of the Galaxy was a heartfelt space opera that turned a tree and a raccoon into beloved icons. These weren't just good superhero movies, they were great movies, period. So the problem now isn't that Marvel can't recover, it's that they seem to be repeating old mistakes without the lessons attached. Thor: The Dark World was dull, but at least it wasn't reliant on excessive side quests and unnecessary jokes, which some of the more recent films definitely are, and let me tell you, it isn't working. Nowadays, it feels like they try to cram as many things as possible into the shortest amount of time. They treat some of the more recent movies like a Mr. Beast video. There's always something happening on screen to try and grab our attention, but it never works because it doesn't give space for characters to feel memorable. It's as if Marvel forgot the very formula that once made its films unmissable. Strong characters, emotional stakes, and storytelling that felt meaningful. But here's the thing, Marvel has a history of surprising us. Just when you think they're down for the count, they pull a Black Panthers or a Avengers Infinity War out of nowhere. They've proven time and time again that they know how to course correct. The question is, will they take that leap again? Will they prioritize quality over quantity, substance over spectacle? Because if they do, there's no reason why the MCU can't reclaim its throne of pop culture. See, the path forward is very clear. The audience hasn't abandoned Marvel because they've outgrown superhero movies. They just stepped back because they're no longer getting the same level of care and craftsmanship as they once did. The spark is still possible, it's just waiting for Marvel to light it again. And honestly, if they need a reminder of why they should, all they have to do is look back at their own success. It was never the CGI or the jokes that built the MCU legacy. It was the heart. The question now is, does Marvel remember how to use it? So, without further ado, what happened? How did a franchise that once had audiences treating every post-credit scene like gospel end up with Secret Invasion? A show so forgettable it makes Thor: The Dark World look like Shakespeare. The answer, as it turns out, is both simple and frustrating. They flew too close to the sun, or in Marvel's case, too close to the Disney Plus content schedule. Do you remember when WandaVision came out? It was different, something refreshing, and had everyone analyzing every little detail, sometimes maybe a little bit too much. It felt like Marvel was taking a creative leap, giving us something weird and wonderful. And then the floodgates opened. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Loki, Hawkeye, Moon Knight, Miss Marvel, She-Hulk, one after another without a moment to catch our breath. Each show had potential, sure, but when you're churning out this much content, things start to blur together. Before you know it, even the die-hard fans were struggling to keep up. But as I've mentioned before, it's not just about the volume, it's about the vibe. When you oversaturate the market, the excitement fades. Think about Endgame. That wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural moment. People planned their lives around it, avoiding spoilers like their social lives depended on it, and came out to theaters crying, cheering, or both. Compare that to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Did anyone even know it was coming out until it was suddenly out? And the Marvels? Blink and you'd miss it. When every release is treated like a big deal, suddenly nothing feels special anymore. And like it previously mentioned in the video, the heart of the problem is that Marvel's become a sort of content factory. Back in the day, it felt like every film or show had a reason to exist. There was a purpose, direction, something pulling us towards the next chapter. But now, it's like Marvel standing at a whiteboard brainstorming random ideas and saying, yeah, we can make that work. Thor and the Guardians? Sure. Moon Knight, but no one really knows what's going on. Why not? Let's just throw it at Disney Plus and see what happens. And so that brings us to storytelling, or more accurately, the lack of it. Remember Tony Stark's arc? A man who started as a narcissistic billionaire and ended up as the heart of the Avengers, sacrificing himself to save the universe. It wasn't just good storytelling, it was great. Compare that to something like Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. It promised mind-bending realities and character-driven drama, but mostly just gave us Wanda's grief sprinkled with jump scares and a whole lot of CGI. Sure, it looked cool, but where was the emotional core? Why should we care about these characters if they don't feel human anymore? And then there's Thor: Love and Thunder. Look, I love a good laugh as much as anyone, but this film felt like a stand-up routine in cosplay. It's like Marvel saw the success of Thor: Ragnarok and thought, what if we did that, but louder? The problem is, humor works when it's balanced. When it's non-stop quips, you lose the weight of the story. Thor's grief, Jane's struggle with cancer, these should have been emotional gut punches. Instead, they were overshadowed by screaming goats. Yes, it was funny the first time. The second, third, and fifth, not so much. But I can't completely leave this out, so I'll just say it quickly. One thing that Thor: Love and Thunder got undeniably right was Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher. His performance was chilling, heartbreaking, and deeply human. He brought more depth to the character than the script ever deserved. It's just a shame that such a phenomenal portrayal was wasted on a movie that seemed more interesting in screaming goats than giving its villain the spotlight. Bale made Gore compelling, but the film made him forgettable, and that is a real tragedy. This leads me to another area where I guess Marvel deserves some credits, in a good way and a bad. Representation. They made significant strides in bringing diverse voices and stories to the forefront. Black Panther was a game changer. Shang-Chi delivered action with heart, which is something we don't often see performed in a good way in mainstream media. But here's the thing, representation is more impactful when it's woven into a strong narrative. Take the Marvels, for example. It had three dynamic, diverse women front and center. A great idea on paper, maybe, but in execution, the film leaned so heavily on the idea of representation that it forgot to tell a cohesive story. It's very important that diversity should not distract the viewer. The goal isn't just to put a few new faces on screen, it's to make audiences care about those faces, regardless of who they are. This very forced diversity doesn't necessarily need to be a problem, but they focus too much on it and it ends up becoming a waste of good characters and an annoyance to the viewers. To be fair, it's not just Marvel that needs to stop this, it's media overall. It's such an overused prompt, and each time I personally see this force phenomenon in a trailer, I just get turned off on the idea of the movie. And then there's this spectacle problem, probably the biggest threat to the MCU as of late. Marvel has always been known for its big, bombastic battles and jaw-dropping visuals, but those moments used to serve the story, not replace it. Think about the fight in the airport in Captain America Civil War. Sure, it was cool to see heroes facing off, but it wasn't just about the action, it was about the emotional stakes. Now, compare that to Eternals, which had some of the most stunning visuals in the MCU, but felt like it was juggling 10 origin stories at once. It's hard to care about the fireworks when you're not invested in the people lighting them. And honestly, Marvel isn't the only franchise to fall into this trap. Look at the DCEU. They spent years playing catch-up, rushing to build a cinematic universe without laying the groundwork. Films like Batman vs. Superman and Justice League felt disjointed, as if the studio was trying to cram a decade's worth of storytelling into 2 hours. Result, a series of films that often felt more like checklists than cohesive narratives. Sound familiar? Before I continue my video, on how the MCU can fix itself, I just gotta take a quick moment to ask if you've been enjoying this video. Feel free to give a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps a ton and makes sure you don't miss more videos like this one. Plus, it's free. Okay, back to the good stuff. So, how does Marvel rise from the ashes? The MCU is down, sure, but it's not out. They've faced missteps before, and with the right moves, they can absolutely turn things around. The question isn't whether Marvel can bounce back, it's how they do it. And spoiler, it's not by making more screaming goats. The first thing Marvel needs to do is slow down. Take a breath. Less is more. Back in early phases, every Marvel project felt like an event. You didn't just watch the Avengers, you experienced it. Scaling back on the relentless release schedule would allow each project to regain that sense of importance. Imagine if fans had time to actually miss the MCU between releases. Absences make the heart grow fonder, right? Plus, slowing down gives writers and filmmakers more time to craft stories that matter, instead of rushing to meet deadlines. There's also one thing I think Marvel should learn from the magic of Deadpool and Wolverine. That movie didn't just succeed because of its R-rated humor or intense action, it worked because it leaned into what fans actually wanted. It wasn't afraid to take risks, whether it was giving us brutal, no-holds-barred fight scenes or letting Deadpool's snarky fourth wall break antics run wild. And let's talk about the chemistry between Deadpool and Wolverine. It was perfect. It's something we've never seen in Marvel films before. Their relationship wasn't just entertaining, it felt real, with a mix of tension, humor, and heart that kept you invested the whole way through. The key here, it focused on the characters. The story wasn't bogged down by unnecessary subplots or dozen side characters. It gave us time to connect with Deadpool and Wolverine as individuals and as a team. That's what Marvel used to do so well in its golden years, and it's something they can still bring back. Plus, taking bold swings like Deadpool and Wolverine did make the MCU feel fresh and exciting again, instead of just another entry in the assembly line. Another example of a genuinely great recent movie they should learn from is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. It worked because it focused on Rocket's deeply personal story. It was emotional, heartfelt, and grounded in character. Marvel needs to bring that same energy across the board. If a movie doesn't have a compelling reason to exist, a story worth telling, then it doesn't need to be made at all. Fans don't want filler, they want connection. Also, like I just said, embrace creative risks. Experiment with genres, take bold swings, things, and most importantly, let directors have a distinct voice. I mean, imagine a Marvel horror film, for example, or a noir detective story that brings a similar vibe as the Batman 2022. They shouldn't be afraid to shake things up a little, you know. Superhero fatigue isn't about people being tired of heroes, it's about people being tired of the same heroes doing the same things. And let's not forget about the importance of villains. Great villains make great stories. Thanos worked not just because he was a powerful character, but because he had a clear, compelling motive. Killmonger wasn't just a bad guy, he was a tragic character with a perspective that made you stop and think. Even Loki, the god of mischief, became one of the MCU's most beloved characters. He was layered, unpredictable, and, well, a little bit charming. Marvel needs to double down on creating villains we love to hate, or maybe even just love. And finally, Marvel needs to listen to its fans. The audience isn't shy about sharing what they love and what they don't, and Marvel has the unique advantage of a massive vocal fanbase. That's not something to ignore, it's something to embrace. Listening doesn't mean pandering, but it does mean paying attention to what works and what doesn't. Fans have invested over a decade in this universe. They want to see it thrive as much as Marvel does. So, at the end of the day, the MCU's golden years were built on heart, innovation, and a deep understanding of what audience wanted and needed from their heroes. It's not too late to recapture that magic, but it's going to take some tough choices, a little humility, and a lot of effort. If Marvel can remember what made their universe so beloved in the first place, there's no reason they can't rise up to the top again. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to see more like it, don't forget to like and subscribe before you go. It really helps out the channel and keeps the conversations going. Plus, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.